My name is Griffin Marsh, and I suppose it's ironic that I got fired by the woman I built an empire with. You wouldn't have seen it coming from the outside. We were Clarissa and Griffin, power couple, co-founders of Von Logic Systems, that sleek tech firm on every short list of rising unicorns. I was the guy with the code and the caffeine addiction. She was the woman in red-bottom heels, dazzling boardrooms and breakfast panels with her charm and pedigree. We were a team. At least, I thought we were. For 6 years, I woke up before the sun, kissed her cheek, and took the train from Queens into Manhattan, grinding out systems architecture and back-end designs from a glass box that reeked of startup sweat. She took town cars and private meetings. I took deli coffee and the 7 train with 500,000 other dreamers. I didn't mind. We played different roles. Mine was just dustier. But Monday was different. The week before, I'd pulled 70 hours. A product launch. A patch crisis. A vendor logistics hiccup. By Sunday night, I was crashing hard at my desk with a reheat slice of pizza and maybe 4 hours of sleep. I told myself it was worth it. The team was grateful. Even Rico, our stoic CFO, gave me a rare nod. But that Monday, the subway hit a signal delay 2 stops from Grand Central. I stared at the blinking red light, heart thudding, breath fogging up the window. It was just 5 minutes. 5 minutes late. I didn't run when the train finally shuddered forward. I walked fast, yes, but I didn't run. Because I believed in the work I had done, in the respect I had earned. I believed, stupidly, in my wife. I buzzed into the Von Logic building at 8:05 a.m. Security nodded. I waved, rode the elevator to the 14th floor. The glass doors slid open with that soft hiss, and I stepped inside, still holding my coffee, still catching my breath, only to find Greta from HR standing by my desk. Greta Gwynn. Her eyes were kind, usually. Tired, like mine, but kind. That morning, though, she couldn't even look at me. "Griffin," she said, voice low, "can we speak in the glass office?" I blinked. "No." She nodded, lips pressed tight. I followed her, barely processing anything until she slid a white folder across the table. The Von Logic logo shimmered in gold across the top. And then I saw it, Clarissa's signature. "Termination due to repeated tardiness and unprofessional conduct," Greta read softly. I stared at her. Repeated tardiness? She couldn't hold my gaze. The executive attendance clause. Section 12.2b. My coffee was still warm in my hand. The same coffee I'd picked up every morning for 6 years. The same cup I held during the all-nighters, the coding marathons, the nights Clarissa was too tired to cook, and I'd bring Ty back from the corner spot just so we could brainstorm APIs together at the kitchen table. "And Clarissa signed off on this?" I asked. My voice didn't shake. I made sure it didn't. Greta hesitated. "Her digital signature is on file. She didn't attend this meeting in person." Of course she didn't. I opened the folder. A checklist. Return of property. Security badge. Legal acknowledgement of termination. It was sterile. Efficient. Like I was being erased by spreadsheet. I'd never missed a product deadline. I'd stayed through blizzards. Skipped family funerals. Pitched clients when Clarissa lost her voice. I remember designing the load balancing engine that scaled our server capacity overnight. I remember debugging for 22 hours straight because a Fortune 500 client's analytics suite crashed. I remembered staying up with Greta when her team was overloaded during onboarding season, but all that got boiled down to repeated tardiness. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten legal action. I just stood there, folder in hand, and walked past my own desk, past the pictures, the signed prototype sketches, the coffee mug Clarissa gave me that said Chief Nerd. And I nodded to Rico as I passed. He was watching from his office, face blank but not surprised. At the elevator, I paused just once, glancing back. The company name was etched in glass across the wall, Von Logic. Her name, not ours. I left the building, the city wind biting through my coat like it wanted to finish the job. And I smiled. Not because I was okay. Not because it didn't hurt. But because deep down, something in me woke up. Something that had been asleep for a long time. Because while she had the cameras in the corner office, I had the code, the contracts, the paper trail. And Clarissa Vaughn was about to remember exactly who built Von Logic. Not the woman in heels, but the man in dust. It didn't always look like glass towers and equity charts. In the beginning, Von Logic was nothing more than a handful of sticky notes slapped on the walls of a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. Our kitchen table doubled as our first server stand, and we shared a laptop until Clarissa's uncle bought us a second one. It was chaos. Ugly, beautiful chaos. Clarissa used to sit cross-legged on the floor with her notepad, pitching slogans and ideas to herself like she was already in a boardroom. I had my headphones on, grinding out code while the radiator clicked like a broken metronome. We didn't have money for branded mugs or office chairs. We had dollar pizza, cold coffee, and belief. That was it. I remember the day she named it, Von Logic. I looked up from my screen, brows raised. Your last name and Logic? She twirled a pencil between her fingers and said, it sounds sleek. Sharp. Like we know what we're doing. I chuckled. Do we? She leaned in, kissed my cheek, and said, you do. I sell it. And that was the truth of it. I built the bones. She gave it skin and lipstick. We made a good team back then. Before the suits and town cars, before the champagne galas and media playbooks, our first client was a local nonprofit that needed a scheduling tool for volunteers. They offered us $400 and pizza. Clarissa didn't flinch. She delivered the pitch like it was a Fortune 100. I stayed up for 4 days building that back end, clean, adaptable, modular enough to scale. That scheduling engine ended up evolving into our flagship product, the one that landed us our Series A. But back then, it was just me, a borrowed IDE, and adrenaline. Clarissa could charm any room. That's what people saw first. But behind every smile was a calculation, a strategy. She knew when to wear heels and when to wear empathy. Investors loved her. Journalists loved her. The board absolutely worshipped her, especially once her father, Lawrence Vaughn, quietly slid into the equation. The man never coded a day in his life, but when he entered a room, people stood up straighter. Legacy money has that effect. I didn't resent it, not at first. His connections helped us break into rooms I could have never hacked into with just Python. I still remember the day the board made her CEO. She brought me home a bottle of scotch and said, whatever gets us there, right? And I nodded, smiled, said congratulations. But that night, as she toasted herself in front of the mirror, I stared at my calloused hands and wondered when I had agreed to be the background. I wasn't some angelic martyr. I wanted success. I wanted growth. I wanted her to succeed because I believed we were one. But slowly, painfully, I started noticing the language shift. It was no longer we when she gave interviews. It was I. I built a company from scratch. I saw the market gap. I led the product team to innovation. I didn't say anything at first. I chalked it up to PR spin, optics, and I kept building new platforms, new features, new partnerships. I had a direct hand in every single system Von Logic deployed in its first 4 years. Every line of our launch framework bore my fingerprints. But recognition faded fast when you weren't in front of the camera. Clarissa was strategic about it. She never belittled me, never publicly dismissed me. She just made sure I was never mentioned at all. At meetings, I became our lead developer. At product demos, she brought Rico or Greta. She stopped asking my opinion on hiring decisions, on branding shifts. I wasn't part of the conversations that shaped the direction of the company anymore. I was the hands that made them happen. Rico Delaney, our CFO, saw it too. Quiet man. Harvard-educated, spreadsheet-loving, but sharp. He pulled me aside one evening, well after the others had gone home, and said, "You okay with this?" I shrugged. With what? He didn't need to elaborate. We stood there, surrounded by softly humming servers and whiteboards filled with flowcharts and roadmaps. Things I had built from scratch, and I just said, whatever gets us there. But the truth was, I was slipping into the shadows of my own creation. My title sounded impressive, CTO, co-founder, but functionally, I was little more than a highly paid problem solver. Clarissa dazzled on stage while I debugged integration errors at 2 a.m. with bloodshot eyes and stale ramen. She became the face. I became the back end. The one time I asked for us to restructure equity, just to reflect our shared input in the company's direction, she didn't yell or fight. She smiled, said, "Griffin, you know I'd give you anything, but we need a clean public face. Investors like consistency." That conversation lasted exactly 6 minutes and ended with me agreeing to keep things as they were. Still, I didn't stop. I loved the work. I loved our team. And deep down, I still loved her, or maybe the version of her I first started building with. The woman who sat on the floor sketching brand names while we shared spring rolls and daydreams. But somewhere along the way, I became part of the furniture. The kind you don't notice until you trip over it. And by the time HR handed me that folder, I realized I wasn't just dust beneath her heels. I was a problem she wanted to sweep away. What she didn't realize, what no one realized, was that I kept everything. Every code version, every asset agreement, every piece of legal scaffolding from our early days. I wasn't just the guy who built the engine. I was the one who laid the tracks. She may have worn the crown, but I built the castle. And now that I was out, it was time to remind the world that this empire didn't rise on press releases and stilettos alone. They say it's not the knife that cuts deepest, it's the hand that holds it. And Clarissa? She didn't even have the decency to hold the blade herself. No confrontation, no warning, no conversation in the car ride home the night before. Just a sterile email chain, a digital signature, and a human resources manager who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else but standing in front of me. I walked into Vaughn Logic that morning breathless, drenched from the misty city air, still holding my half-finished coffee like it was some kind of ID badge. My worn blazer flapped open at the sides, laptop bag slung over one shoulder, lanyard slightly twisted, none of it perfect, but all of it familiar. This was my routine, my rhythm, my home. And yet Greta wouldn't even look at me. Griffin, she'd started, almost apologetically. Then the words came tumbling out like a script she'd rehearsed and regretted all morning. Due to executive policy violations and performance discrepancies, we've been directed to terminate your employment effective immediately. I remember watching her lips move, but the sound came through muffled. Like someone had dropped a pillow over my ears. I scanned the document in my hands, the Vaughn Logic gold foil at the top gleaming under the conference room lights like a sick joke. Clarissa's digital signature was affixed neatly at the bottom. There was no personal note, no meeting request, no warning email or sit down. Just Griffin Marsh termination for professional conduct breach, 3 documented tardiness reports within the past quarter. Deemed unfit for executive standards. I wanted to laugh. Tardiness? They were citing lateness? I hadn't missed a single deliverable in 6 years. I built the actual workflow system that flagged late tasks. I was the one who wrote the fail-safes, the rolling backup solutions, the performance alerts. They ran my heartbeat through the veins of this company, and now I was being cut loose over a train delay? It would have been less insulting if they accused me of theft. At least that carried weight. But this was theater. This was her, making a point. I sat there, the folder open in front of me, Greta offering me a glass of water I didn't take. I could hear the murmur of the office outside, the whir of printers, the soft clicking of keyboards, someone laughing too loudly in marketing. Life, moving forward. Without me. My throat was dry. Not because I wanted to cry, but because I felt hollow. 5 years. 5 years of overtime, of missed anniversaries, of birthday dinners rescheduled around product launches. 5 years of silence when Clarissa took the stage and never once mentioned my name. 5 years of watching my credit shrink while her image expanded. And now? I was a risk. A liability. A distraction. I didn't sign the termination form. Not yet. I stood instead, walked back to my desk like a man walking through his own funeral. My team didn't speak. They didn't know what to say. Some avoided my eyes. Others just froze. Rico wasn't in his office. Probably on one of his check-in calls with West Coast investors. I almost wished he were there. Just to have one person who knew how wrong this was. I picked up the framed photo from my desk. It was from our first year, a company barbecue in Prospect Park. Clarissa had made me wear a goofy CTO apron while she flipped burgers and called me the grill father. Everyone laughed. Back then, they called us the couple with a co-base. Now I was just another folder in HR's file drawer. I didn't pack up everything. Just the essentials. Flash drive. Moleskine notebook. The coffee mug my niece gave me that read, code like a legend. I walked out without a sound, each step echoing through the sleek hallways we designed together. Past the digital timeline etched into the wall near reception. Founded 2016, Griffin Marsh and Clarissa Vaughn. They hadn't scraped my name off yet. That would probably come next. The security guard at the front desk gave me a nod. The same guy who waved to me every morning, rain or shine. His brows furrowed when he saw the folder in my hand. He didn't say anything, but I saw the shift in his eyes. Recognition. Pity. Maybe even disappointment. Outside, the wind slapped me in the face. The city didn't stop moving just because your world did. Cabs honked. Vendors called out lunch specials. Commuters flowed around me like I wasn't even there. I stood under the massive Von Logic sign above the building, staring up like a man who forgot which side of the glass he was on. 5 minutes late. That's all it took. 5 minutes, and I was erased. I walked to the station, hands shaking more from fury than cold. People think heartbreak is loud, but mine was quiet, focused. I kept thinking about how Greta wouldn't meet my eyes, how Rico hadn't said a word, how Clarissa didn't even text me. No, I thought. She doesn't think I'll do anything. She thinks I'll disappear quietly. She thinks I'll crawl back to freelance gigs and bury myself in code until the headlines stop mentioning my name. She forgot who I am. I got home to my apartment. I dropped the termination packet on the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and walked into the study. My study. Not the office with the awards and magazine covers. The study with the second-hand desk, the server tower I built by hand, and the drive. The encrypted drive. Clarissa never cared to ask about that drive. And as I sat down and booted it up, entering the passcode from memory, a strange calm settled over me. It was all still there. Every design document, every contribution log, every legal draft, every clause we'd written when we were just two kids with a dream and too much ambition, including the one clause Clarissa didn't think I remembered, the one that would change everything. The thing about foresight is, no one applauds it until the disaster hits. Clarissa never asked what was in the drive. Not once. In the early years, she called it my paranoia vault, said I overcomplicated everything with redundant backups, encrypted folders, layered server security, version histories. But I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was trying to protect what we built. Because somewhere in me, even back then, I knew the danger of being the silent architect behind someone else's spotlight. I sat in my study, lights off, screen glowing like a quiet witness. The tower hummed to life beneath the desk, fans spinning up like old lungs stretching for breath. I reached down, felt the metal warmth of the flash drive tucked inside its port, and pulled up the root folder, VLS_origination. The original shell of Von Logic systems. Folder after folder of timestamped files, dated all the way back to our first prototype. Contract drafts. Early investor correspondence. UX diagrams with my annotations. Meeting notes I'd typed after long nights drinking too much coffee and dreaming too far ahead. But it was the articles of incorporation, signed final file that mattered now. I opened it slowly, like it might bite. This wasn't a weapon when I wrote it. It was protection. We were young and excited, but not stupid. Clarissa had insisted her father's lawyers take the lead, and I hadn't objected. But I read every line. And in that final draft, after enough rounds of edits to drive anyone mad, I'd managed to slip in one line under the Founder Protections Clause, legal language that meant little to someone who'd never opened a governance packet, but everything to someone like me. In the event of a hostile override by the board or ethical breach by any sitting executive involving misrepresentation of equity or contribution, majority control of Von Logic systems shall revert to the original technological founder, as defined in Exhibit A. I scrolled down to Exhibit A. My name, Griffin Marsh, initialed and notarized. It hadn't been revoked. It hadn't been amended. Clarissa, in her rush to secure investor trust, had leaned on her father's image and presence so heavily she never looked back at the documents we'd written together before the board even existed. Because back then, she trusted me. Because back then, she needed me. But she forgot I don't forget. I sat back, the weight of it pressing into my chest. I didn't feel powerful. Not yet. Just sad. That it came to this. That I was digging through old legal armor to shield myself from someone I once kissed goodnight every evening. Someone I stayed up with planning our product roadmaps beside cold lo mein and rumpled blankets. But this was no longer marriage. This was corporate war. And I hadn't just built the battlefield. I'd planted the landmines, just in case. I reached for the external drive sitting beside my monitor and began copying the files, every document tied to my authorship, every patent listing where my name appeared first, every email between me and our first 3 clients. Not for revenge. For protection. Clarissa had the boardroom, but I had the blueprint. And if I was going to challenge what she'd done, erase me with a form and a smile, I needed to remind her what was written beneath the polish. Somewhere around midnight, I took a break and walked to the window. The city was still alive, horns echoing faintly, streetlights throwing gold lines across slick pavement. I looked down at the quiet street, the same one. I remembered when we celebrated our first 100-user milestone with dollar store party hats and a single cupcake. When she sat cross-legged in bed calculating our burn rate, eyes wild with optimism. When she said, "No matter how big this gets, we stay equal, okay?" But somewhere along the way, the spotlight became a drug, and I became a shadow she didn't mind losing. I returned to the computer and pulled out a folder marked legal. Inside was the most recent share register from VonLogic, updated last quarter. No one thought to change the administrative contact for that filing. Still listed under Griffin Marsh, CTO, co-founder. I'd received the update by default and quietly backed it up without thinking much about it. But now, that list mattered more than anything. Because according to the structure Clarissa's father had helped us build, spread equity among strategic, safe, investors, early loyalists, and founders, I was still a major voting shareholder. Not majority. Not yet. But close. And with the reversion clause? Close was enough to crack the illusion she was the sole queen of the empire. I reached out to two of the original investors that night. Not high rollers. Just early believers who wrote $25,000 checks back when we barely had a logo. People who remembered my late-night demos and follow-ups. I sent them personal messages, attaching a timestamped image of the clause and a polite but direct question. Would you be open to a conversation about your voting shares and the current ethical direction of VonLogic systems? By morning, I had replies. One lukewarm. One interested. The door had cracked open. I stared at my reflection in the monitor screen. Tired eyes. Wrinkled tea. Graying at the temples a little more than I remembered. But I didn't feel weak. I felt real. Not the placeholder she tried to reduce me to. Not the ghost at the machine. But the man who built the engine. And tomorrow, I'd walk into the lion's den, not to roar, but to remind them all who planted the bricks they walk on. Because if Clarissa thought she buried me in protocol and performance reviews, she forgot one thing. I'm the one who wrote the system, and it never stopped working. I wore the same blazer they remembered. That was intentional. No new suit, no flashy statement. Just the one Clarissa had once picked out with me in a department store clearance aisle, back before either of us knew how to read a shareholder report. It was worn at the elbows and still smelled faintly of cedar from my closet, but it fit like memory. The VonLogic executive board met every Tuesday morning in the west wing of the building, a corner glass conference room designed to overlook the city. Clarissa had once called it the skybox of progress. That morning, it would be something else entirely. I walked past security like I still belonged. The receptionist's eyes widened, and she instinctively reached for the phone, probably to alert someone I didn't have an appointment. I nodded at her calmly and kept walking. The elevator to the executive floor opened without a keycard. I still had mine. They hadn't disabled it yet. Sloppy. When the doors opened on the 18th floor, I could already hear them. Voices, laughter, espresso machines whirring. Rico's laugh, low and dry, echoed off the glass. The board was settling in. Clarissa had probably already begun running through the agenda. She liked starting early. Efficiency is theater. I reached the door. Through the frosted glass I could see silhouettes. Power stances. Tablets. Suits. Clarissa's signature red heels beneath the table. I didn't knock. I opened the door slowly and stepped inside. The room went quiet. Clarissa froze mid-sentence. Her hand still held a remote to the presentation screen behind her, which displayed a slide labeled Q3 Acceleration Strategy. Griffin? She said, voice caught between confusion and fury. Rico's eyes widened, but he didn't say anything. His gaze flicked to the folder in my hand. Greta was seated at the far end. She straightened in her chair, color draining from her face. Clarissa stepped away from the screen, heels clicking like gunshots on the polished floor. You don't belong here, she said, every syllable sharp. I calmly closed the door behind me and walked to the head of the table, the seat Clarissa stood in front of. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I do, actually. I opened the folder and pulled out the articles of incorporation, the signed originals. The air changed. Everyone leaned forward, instinctively sensing something legal, something heavy. I'm invoking the founder reversion clause, I said. Section 9.3. Based on leadership misconduct and misrepresentation of equity, as evidenced by the termination filed without cause or board consultation last week. Clarissa's jaw tightened. That clause is irrelevant. It was early-stage boilerplate. Still active, I said. Never revoked. Never superseded. It's tied directly to exhibit on my name. And I have updated documentation from the Registrar of Share Allocations, filed last quarter. I laid down the share register next. The real one. With my voting shares still intact, augmented by the early investors who had agreed, in writing, to shift their proxies. I now hold controlling interest, I said. The silence cracked like glass. One of the board members, I think her name was Jeanette, blinked slowly. This can't be accurate. Rico finally spoke, voice low. He's not bluffing. Clarissa turned to him. You knew. I suspected. And I told you we should have reviewed governance before authorizing termination. Her face lost its color. Even if this clause holds, she hissed, you can't just walk in and claim power. There are procedures, votes, protocol. I nodded. Exactly. Procedures. Which your termination of me violated. You didn't present it to the board. You didn't allow rebuttal. You used HR as a weapon. Greta looked like she wanted to shrink into her seat. I pulled out the final envelope, copies of the termination memo, my untouched performance reviews, and screenshots of internal communications with timestamps showing no performance warnings were ever issued. I built the scheduling system that tracks infractions, I added. It flagged no warnings, no progressive disciplinary action, no review of late arrivals. Because I wasn't late enough to trigger it. The termination was personal, not procedural. Clarissa's voice shook, but not from fear. From rage. You're trying to humiliate me. I shook my head. No, you did that yourself. She looked to the board, searching for support. But they were quiet now, reading the papers, flipping through the documents, suddenly remembering that Vaughn Logic didn't run on charisma and talking points. It ran on code, on systems, on infrastructure. It ran on me. I stepped back. I'm not here to destroy anything. I'm here to take back what I never stopped building. You can stay on under new terms. But this company is no longer your throne. Clarissa stared at me, stunned. Then slowly, she sat down. And just like that, the power shifted. I walked out with calm steps, leaving behind only the folder and a room full of people who finally remembered who wrote the blueprint for their so-called progress. As the door closed behind me, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relieved, because I hadn't come for revenge. I came for restoration, and I just got it. It didn't take long. Less than 48 hours after the boardroom shift, Vaughn Logic became a headline. Not for product innovation or a record quarterly report, but because the man they quietly fired walked back in, took control, and left the board in stunned silence. The first headline hit the tech blogs by noon. Fired husband reclaims tech unicorn. Vaughn Logic's founding CTO takes the helm. The second was less subtle. High heels, low blows. Inside the Vaughn Logic power couple split. I didn't even have time to process the fallout before my inbox exploded. Journalists. Former colleagues. College friends I hadn't heard from in years. Everyone wanted a quote, a comment, a slice of the story. But the people who reached out quietly, the ones who mattered most, weren't looking for gossip. They remembered. Griff, I was a junior when you stayed with me until 10 p.m. fixing my broken local dev environment. Welcome back. Thanks for always making space for interns. You never made me feel small. Even when I didn't know the difference between Git and GitHub. I joined because of your platform. I stayed because of your integrity. They poured in. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Former and current Vaughn Logic employees, some anonymous, some brave enough to attach their names. And though the board had tried to market Clarissa as the visionary leader, the human side of the company, the heartbeat, had always come from the man behind the firewall. From me. The first time I saw the clip of Clarissa's statement, I was sitting at my kitchen table, eating a reheated slice of mushroom pizza and watching the press conference on mute. The camera loved her. It always had. She wore navy polished, serious, confident. A flick of eyeliner, a soft tremble in her voice, just enough to hint at pain while never letting go of composure. I built this company, she said into the sea of microphones. From nothing. I gave it my name, my face, my sleepless nights. And I trusted someone I loved to walk beside me in that journey. Instead, I was undermined. This was a betrayal, not just of our marriage, but of trust. The angle was clear. Victim. Survivor. The woman who gave everything and was discarded by an opportunistic man who staged a corporate coup. I muted it again and sat there for a long time, chewing slowly, listening to the faint hum of my refrigerator and the city noise beyond my window. I didn't respond that day. I let her have the moment. But by the next morning, a statement was released from my office. No podium. No fanfare. Just a quiet release to the media with a PDF attachment titled, Clarifications from co-founder Griffin Marsh. It included A full timeline of my contributions to Vaughn Logic from inception to present, with documentation. Screenshots of early Slack logs, emails, calendar invites, architecture drafts. A financial breakdown of who funded the first 6 months of operating costs, my savings account. A side-by-side comparison of the internal HR documents versus company protocol for executive dismissal. And finally, a screenshot of a clause Clarissa had signed off on, acknowledging my reversion rights, dated and notarized. But what caught the media's attention most was the final paragraph. I didn't come back to burn the house down. I came back because I built the foundation, and someone changed the locks. This isn't revenge. This is recognition. The response was immediate. Some publications were still skeptical, conflict makes better drama than facts, but others flipped. A few anchors on business channels even chuckled and called it the most graceful tech takeover since Jobs' return to Apple. I didn't let the comparison settle too long. I wasn't trying to be anyone else. I was just reclaiming what I never stopped loving. But Clarissa didn't fade into the background. She doubled down. A week later, she released a follow-up interview, glossy cover photo, a single tear glistening as she told a reporter from Trend in Tech that power can sometimes bring out the darkest sides in people you thought you knew. She called me emotionally unstable. Said she had concerns about my leadership. I read it over a cup of black coffee. Rico was the first to text after the article dropped. She's going scorched earth, he wrote. You want me to respond on behalf of the board? I stared at my screen, thought about it, then replied, no, let her run out of steam. Because here's the thing. You can fight with fire, or you can build with it. And I was tired of fighting. Instead, I called a full company meeting. No shareholders. No executives. Just staff. We held it virtually so everyone, remote, hybrid, in person, could attend. No press. No optics. Just people. I appeared on screen in the same worn blazer. The same one I'd worn that day. No branding behind me. No teleprompter. Just me and a quiet apology. I want to thank all of you who stayed, who held this place together while leadership lost its way. I know a lot of you have questions. I know trust doesn't come back overnight, but I'm here to rebuild it, from the ground up if I have to. The chat window exploded, not with sarcasm, not with doubt, with hope. I stayed online for 2 hours answering questions about structure, about transparency, about ethics. I didn't hide from the mess. We talked about the lateness clause, about performance metrics, about how I plan to change the internal review system entirely. And by the end, I didn't feel like the fired husband who got lucky. I felt like a leader. That night, I opened my inbox again. A new message blinked into view. From Clarissa. Subject line. You made your point. No body. Just that one line. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say, not yet. Instead, I stared at the blinking cursor. At the messages from staff. The emails from people I hadn't heard from since grad school. The reports showing a sudden uptick in job applications and employee morale. She was right about one thing. Power does reveal who people are. And for the first time in a long time, I was proud of what it revealed in me. I watched the footage in full this time. Not from a blog clip. Not from a soundbite. I sat at my desk with the blinds drawn, speakers up, and played the entire press conference from start to finish. Clarissa stood in front of the Vaughn Logic logo, perfectly lit, each angle calculated to soften her jawline and widen her eyes. She wore a cream blouse with pearl accents, elegant, remorseful. Behind her stood 2 PR consultants and a media handler. She didn't shake, didn't fumble. I stand here today, she began, not as a CEO, but as a woman who has fought for everything she's built. I watched her hands fold gently over the podium. I've been painted as many things in the last week. A thief, a liar, a power-hungry executive who trampled her own husband. But no one seems to remember how many hours I gave this company, how many sacrifices I made, how many rooms I had to walk into where no one respected me until I proved I belonged. She paused for effect. She was always good at that. I built this company with my name, my pitch, my network, my image. And I trusted someone I loved to be my partner. Instead, he waited in the wings, waited for a misstep, and then used an old clause, one I didn't even know still existed, to strip me of my role. She exhaled softly, trembled slightly. The camera caught it perfectly. I am not perfect, she said, but I am not what they say I am, and I will not be silenced. She stepped back from the podium. Applause followed. Not thunderous, but measured. Enough for the media to cut and splice. Enough to spark headlines that read, Clarissa Vaughn breaks silence with poise and CEO or victim. The court of public opinion splits. I closed the laptop. She told her story. Now it was my turn. The next day, I didn't call a press conference. I didn't dress in armor or posture like a warrior. I wore a gray sweater, the kind Clarissa used to tell me was too comfortable for public, and I walked into the break room where the staff gathered every Friday for coffee and catch-up. It wasn't about staging. It was about access. I knew the media would find the recording eventually. I wanted them to, but I wanted my people to hear it first. The ones who built alongside me. The ones who were told I vanished without notice. I stood in front of a chalkboard that still had someone's doodle of a cat and a list of cafeteria complaints. I'm not here to compete with Clarissa, I said. I'm here to complete the story. Silence. Then phones lifted. People began recording. I didn't stop them. Vaughn Logic started in a 2-bedroom apartment with a fridge that barely worked and a whiteboard that leaned against the radiator. We had no clients. No investors. We were hungry, sleep-deprived, and desperate to make something that mattered. I pulled up a screen share from my laptop, slides with photos, dates, and documents. Me hunched over a table with wires sprawled across it. The first UX diagram. Clarissa and me with matching bags under our eyes and matching faith in what we were building. She pitched it. She wore the heels. She closed the deals. And I built the product that made it possible. I wrote the code that ran 87% of our first platform. I onboarded our first 15 clients personally. I fixed our first system crash from a diner off Flatbush at 2 in the morning using borrowed Wi-Fi. I tapped to the next slide, email receipts, GitHub logs, screenshots of my contributions from those early days. Timestamped. Verified. I never asked for a parade. I never asked for my name on the front door. But I did ask, once, that we stay equals. She said yes. And then somewhere along the way, she stopped meaning it. The room remained still. Some nodding. Some eyes lowered. When I was terminated, it was done without board review. Without warning. It cited tardiness. I built the very system that measures our punctuality standards, and according to that system, I never violated them. Not once. I flipped to the next slide. Performance dashboards. No red flags. No errors. I didn't fight because I wanted revenge. I fought because if someone who co-built this company could be erased in 5 minutes, then what does that say about the rest of you? About interns, analysts, developers working overtime for recognition that never comes? I paused. Let the question hang. She had her say. And I'm not taking that away from her. But now you've seen what I've done, what I've kept, what I've contributed. I'm not perfect. But I showed up. Day after day. I never stopped. Then I opened the final file. The clause. Highlighted. Signed. Notarized. Her initials at the bottom. I didn't trick her. I didn't wait in the wings. I put this in place when we were nobodies, because I believed if either of us strayed, the company still deserved a future. That clause? It's not a loophole. It's a safeguard. One she agreed to. I closed the laptop gently. This isn't about gender, or image, or who the media sides with. This is about the truth. I didn't come back for vengeance. I came back because I finally remembered my worth. Silence filled the room. Not awkward silence. Not confused. Just clarity. A few clapped. Then more. Not thunderous. Not staged. Just real. Later that day, clips of my speech started spreading. Not as quickly as hers, but with more weight. I didn't dress it up. I didn't perform. I just told the story with the receipts. The media ran comparisons side by side. Her press conference and my chalkboard speech. Image versus integrity, one columnist titled it. Another headline read, he let her speak. Then he spoke with evidence. Clarissa released no rebuttal. Internally, the energy shifted. Employees walked past me and nodded now, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but like they saw me. Finally, even Greta emailed me that night. Thank you for not burying the truth in spectacle. I didn't respond, just smiled, because I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to be seen, and for the first time in years, I was. There was a quiet that settled over Vaughn Logic the Monday after M. It was more like the collective exhale after a storm. The kind you don't realize you were holding in until someone finally says the thing everyone else was too scared to voice. For the first time since reclaiming my seat, I walked the halls without feeling like a ghost. Heads lifted when I passed. A few people even smiled. One junior dev named Ray stopped me by the elevators just to say, thanks, for not pretending none of it happened. I nodded, grateful, but I knew the speech wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Clarissa was still VP of PR. I didn't fire her. I could have. It would have been easy, justified even. But I wasn't interested in revenge. I wanted culture. I wanted correction. I wanted to make sure that no one else in this company ever felt what I felt. Disposable, overlooked, erased. So I started with the handbook. The Von Logic Employee Handbook was a sleek little document wrapped in faux innovation speak. Clarissa had overseen the last major revision, and it showed. Every section was polished to look modern but had teeth hidden beneath the language. Lateness policies that allowed for termination after 3 infractions without review. Feedback structures that funneled upward concerns through HR filters Clarissa personally vetted. Bonus incentives that looked generous on paper but were nearly impossible to unlock without exact adherence to criteria she controlled. I read through it again that night in my study, the same room where I'd unearthed the clause that changed everything. I marked it with a red pen, section by section, word by word. I didn't want to bandage what was broken. I wanted to rebuild it from the ground up. By Wednesday, I called a leadership summit, not just executives, but team leads, department managers, and longtime staff who had been part of Von Logic before we made headlines. They sat in the large conference room, most of them unsure of what to expect. I want you all to know something up front, I said. There will be no mass terminations. No restructuring plans that you'll read about in a press release before you hear it from me. What we're doing here today isn't damage control. It's design. Real design. Not for our product, for our people. I held up the handbook. This doesn't reflect who we are. Not anymore. So we're rewriting it. Together. The room was still. Then someone raised a hand. Greta, surprisingly. You're serious? I nodded. Absolutely. Starting today, we reevaluate every policy from a human-first lens. Flexibility. Transparency. Fairness. If we say we care about employees, then we start acting like it. Rico looked at me from across the room and gave a slow, subtle nod. He wasn't the type to get emotional, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch upward. He'd seen it all. The rise, the shift, the fall. He knew what this meant. For the next 5 hours, we broke into groups. I walked between tables as people scribbled notes, pulled up documents, and debated constructively about what actually helped and what harmed. It wasn't easy. Some people were hesitant. Others were blunt. But by the end of the day, we had a new framework, one built not by edict, but by consensus. We removed the punitive lateness clause. We instituted grace periods, context-based review systems, and trust-based time tracking. We implemented a new complaint resolution process, one that included a rotating employee council so voices couldn't be buried in HR. We replaced the rigid quarterly review system with flexible feedback loops that encouraged mentorship, not micromanagement. And most importantly, we created a clause that required executive decisions affecting employment status to go through a peer review panel, made up of employees from multiple departments. That way, what happened to me couldn't happen to anyone else. I brought Clarissa the draft on Friday. She was in her office. Glass walls, minimalist decor, awards still lined up like little soldiers on a shelf. She didn't look surprised to see me. I heard, she said before I could speak. You're rewriting everything. Yes, I replied. Everything that made this place feel like a machine instead of a mission. She leaned back. And what do you want from me? To read it. To understand that this isn't personal. It's necessary. She didn't reach for the document right away. Just stared at me for a long moment, something unreadable behind her eyes. You really meant it. When you said this wasn't about revenge. I did. She looked away, almost wistful. You know, I used to dream about this place being the company people talked about not just for what it did, but for how it treated its people. You still can, I said, but you won't lead it the same way. She finally took the draft and began flipping through the pages. She didn't say thank you. I didn't expect her to. But when I left the office, I saw her reading. And for now, that was enough. The following week, we held a company-wide vote to ratify the new handbook. 92% approved. The handbook was published internally and externally. We made it public on our website, no password, no firewall. If we were going to claim transparency, we were going to live it. And that wasn't all. I promoted Rico to COO. Officially. He'd been the quiet engine behind our financial growth for years, and he deserved more than being the man in the corner office with spreadsheets. I called Greta into my office and apologized. I put you in an impossible position, I told her. No employee should ever be asked to enforce something they know is wrong. She looked stunned. Then, quietly, she said, "Thank you. I didn't think I'd hear that. And I want you to lead our new people and culture division. Not HR, culture. Real structure, real change." Her smile was small but genuine. I'd be honored. One by one, we began rebuilding, not with press releases or branded initiatives, but with actual choices. With empathy. And then I did something Clarissa never would have done. I opened the floor. We created a rotating committee open to all employees, any department, any level. They'd meet monthly with leadership, pitch ideas, challenge assumptions, offer insight. No red tape. No executive gatekeeping. The first time we held one of those meetings, a junior engineer named Shahana raised her hand and said, "Can we use some of our budget for mental health stipends?" The old Von Logic would have said, "Not scalable. Not cost-effective." The new Von Logic said, "Yes. Let's figure out how." By the end of that quarter, employee retention went up. Anonymous satisfaction scores doubled. We saw a 20% drop in complaints and a spike in voluntary referrals for new hires. We didn't just fix the culture. We rewrote it. And for the first time in a long time, I looked around and felt like I was standing in something I could be proud of. Not just a tech company, not just a comeback story, but a community. Because the best thing I ever built at Von Logic wasn't code. It was trust. And now, brick by brick, we were building it again. The day Alma got married, the sun over Queens didn't feel like New York. It felt like late summer in Georgia, warm, generous, golden. The kind of day that made you want to walk slow and breathe deep. I stood outside the church with a corsage pinned awkwardly to my lapel, adjusting the sleeves of my suit for the 5th time. It wasn't designer. It didn't need to be. It fit me. That was enough. Alma looked radiant, nerves hidden beneath years of practice being our mother's emotional shock absorber. She didn't cry when our father died. Didn't cry when her fiancé lost his job last year and moved in with her parents. But that morning, when I reached out my hand to walk her down the aisle, she squeezed it like a lifeline. "I can't believe you made it on time," she whispered, smirking through the veil. "Knew me?" I said, and winked. The guests rose. The organ swelled. And as we walked, I kept thinking, this is what time well spent looks like. Not in quarterly reports or market share. Not in billboards or keynote addresses. But in being where you're supposed to be when it actually matters. Clarissa wasn't there. We were still married, technically. Still legally bound by paperwork and a last name that had become more branding than bond. But we hadn't shared a home in months. After everything unfolded at Von Logic, she quietly moved into a townhouse uptown. No dramatic exit, no press release. Just boxes, silence, and one final text message. I think we broke long before the boardroom. She was right. And yet, I didn't hate her. Hate is easy when someone steals from you, betrays you. But when you build something side by side for years, when you whisper dreams over midnight dinners and joke about IPOs while brushing your teeth, it's harder. The line between resentment and nostalgia blurs. Still, I didn't look for her in the pews. Didn't check my phone. Today wasn't about us. It was about Alma. The ceremony was beautiful. Honest. Her vows were filled with equal parts poetry and practical sarcasm. Her husband, Dave, choked up halfway through his. I didn't cry, but I watched my mother do enough of that for the both of us. At the reception, I sat near the back with my cousins, most of whom I hadn't seen since college. We drank cheap wine, ate overpriced shrimp, and laughed over memories that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. One of my cousins nudged me. "Dude, you're like a celebrity now." I rolled my eyes. Tech company drama doesn't count. No, for real. Grandma has a printout of that article in Fast Tech. She thinks you're on the TV. I laughed at that. Honest laughter. The kind that came up from the gut instead of the throat. Another cousin leaned in. "So what now? You just run the company and wear sweaters to press events?" "Something like that," I said. But I was thinking about more than Von Logic. I was thinking about the hours I lost. The birthdays I missed because of conference calls. The dates I canceled because a deployment failed. The dinners with Alma I rushed through because Clarissa needed me to prep for a stakeholder pitch. I was thinking about the night Clarissa called me at 11 p.m. and said, "We need to make the brand more about me. It's cleaner." And how I said nothing. I thought that was sacrifice. I thought that was partnership. But now, watching Alma spin on the dance floor, veil off, hair loose, smile wide, I realized sacrifice without honesty is just quiet surrender. Around dessert, my niece plopped down beside me, chocolate frosting on her chin. "Uncle Griff," she said between bites. "Are you famous now?" I shook my head. "No, just someone who remembered what matters." She blinked. "Like family?" "Exactly like that." The DJ shifted into slow songs. People started leaving for the night. Alma hugged me tight before I left, her perfume familiar and grounding. "You looked happy," she said. "Like really happy." "I think I am," I told her. Maybe for the first time in years. She held my face in both hands the way our mother used to, smiled, and said, "Don't forget that tomorrow." I promised I wouldn't. Driving home, I rolled the windows down and let the cool air wash over me. The skyline glowed in the distance, still full of meetings and deadlines and people trying to make their mark. But I didn't feel the pull anymore. Not like before. I didn't need to outrun obscurity. I'd already done the impossible. I'd gotten myself back. At a red light, I pulled out my phone. One unread message from Clarissa. "I heard about Alma's wedding. I'm glad you made it. You were always better at showing up than I was." No signature. No emoji. Just her voice in plain text. I stared at it for a moment, thumbs hovering. Then I put the phone down. Some things don't need a response. Some things just need to be felt. I got home around midnight. My apartment was quiet. No company folders stacked on the desk. No spreadsheets open on 3 monitors. Just a single photo of me and Alma as kids in the hallway, next to a handwritten note I'd framed months ago. It said, "Remember who you were before the title." That night, I slept for 9 hours. No dreams. No panic jolting me awake. Just peace. The next morning, I woke early, made coffee, and sat by the window as the sun crept in. I didn't open my laptop. I didn't check my inbox. I just sat there, sipping slowly, watching the world move. And for once, I didn't feel behind. I didn't feel forgotten. I didn't feel like dust beneath anyone's heel. I felt whole. And maybe that was the real second chance. Not just reclaiming the company, but reclaiming myself. The day Von Logic went public, I wasn't in New York. I was standing on a rocky stretch of coastline in Maine, boots sinking slightly into soft sand, the Atlantic crashing a slow rhythm that drowned out the rest of the world. The sky above me was open and cloudless. No press. No cameras. Just me, a worn thermos of coffee, and the knowledge that somewhere back in Manhattan, a bell was being rung in my name. I didn't fly back for the ceremony. I didn't want the flashbulbs or the speeches. I left those to Rico, now officially the CEO. He was the right face for this next chapter, sharp, grounded, and never in love with his own voice. He FaceTimed me briefly from the floor of the exchange, suit pressed, grin wide, and I could hear the clamor of excitement around him. "You sure you don't want to say something to the press?" he asked. I shook my head. "I've said enough. Now let the company speak for itself." He nodded. "You'll still make the cover of Fast Tech." They ran the headline already, "The man who got fired by his wife and bought the company." I laughed. Let them have their tagline. I know the truth. The truth was, the IPO wasn't a victory lap. It was a moment of quiet vindication. Not because I'd won, but because I'd survived. Clarissa and I finalized our divorce 6 months prior. It was civil, as promised. She took the townhouse uptown, the art collection we'd acquired over the years, and a settlement that made headlines only because it included non-voting stock. We sat down once, across a polished conference table. No lawyers, just 2 people who had once built something together and then broken it apart. She didn't apologize. Neither did I. She looked older, but not in a bad way. Just softened. A little more real. A little less war-ready. "I never hated you," she said. "I never stopped loving the version of you I started with," I replied. And that was it. No outbursts. No slammed doors. We shook hands. And I walked out lighter than I'd felt in years. Owning the company wasn't about power. Not anymore. It was about stewardship. About making sure the machine we created didn't eat the very people who gave it life. I'd seen what happened when a company became a mirror for one person's ego. I'd lived it. Now, I wanted Von Logic to be more than that. I spent the months before the IPO restructuring ownership. I kept my majority, 51%, just enough to retain voting control. The rest I spread across employees, early investors, and a newly formed equity trust for staff-level bonuses. We implemented profit sharing. Real profit sharing, not the hollow promise startups dangle like carrots before they implode or sell out. I opened mentorship programs, expanded parental leave, introduced anonymous internal forums where anyone could challenge a decision, including mine. And I made sure that everyone, from the receptionist to the lead data scientist, had access to professional development funding that didn't require them to jump through hoops or kiss anyone's ring. People asked if I was trying to be a saint, if this was my way of buying back goodwill. Maybe. But more than that, I was building something I wished I'd had when I was the one staying late, staring at lines of code with cold takeout and no recognition. At the company's first annual retreat post-IPO, I didn't stand at the podium. I sat in the third row, watched Rico give the keynote, watched Greta introduce a panel on emotional sustainability and leadership, watched Shahana, our once junior engineer, present a product update that stunned the entire room. I didn't need to be the face anymore. I didn't want to be. I was the foundation. And foundations don't need applause. They just need to hold. After the IPO, the media didn't stop. They never do. One headline in particular made me pause. From dust to dominance, the husband who outmaneuvered the spotlight. But the article itself surprised me. It wasn't salacious. It was curious. It wanted to understand how someone like me, low profile, quiet, once dismissed, managed to reclaim not just a company, but a sense of purpose. I gave them one quote. Just one. I wasn't trying to take over. I was just tired of pretending I hadn't been here the whole time. It went viral. People related to it. Because so many of us have been in that room, haven't we? The one where our work is seen but our names aren't. Where our ideas are used but our voices are silenced. Where we show up, over and over again, and are thanked with performance reviews that overlook the fire we put out 2 Fridays ago. I'd lived in that shadow. Now I was pulling others into the light with me. Clarissa and I didn't speak much after the divorce, but she sent me a note after the IPO. No email. A handwritten card. Whatever else we became, we did build something real. Don't forget that. I didn't. I kept that card on a shelf in my study, beside the old flash drive that still held the original Vaughn Logic prototypes and the first scanned copy of our Articles of Incorporation. The clause that saved me. The foresight that told me, even back then, that fairness wasn't a guarantee, it had to be written. Some nights I still sit in that room, sip coffee, and flip through the pages of what we used to dream. Not out of longing, but because it reminds me what happens when you stop speaking up. When you let love become currency. When you stop asking, does this still feel right? I don't regret the company. I regret how long it took me to believe I deserved it. These days, people stop me at conferences, pull me aside in airports, send emails from personal domains just to say, I saw what you did. And I remembered something in myself. That's what I care about now. Legacy not as a statue, but as a mirror. Not, look what I built. But look what's possible when you stop letting yourself be erased. Fast Tech wanted another cover shoot a year later. Said they were doing a retrospective. From fired to founder, Griffin Marsh, 2 years after the take back. I declined the photos. Told them they could use a candid. I didn't need to stand on the cover. Because now, when people hear my name, they don't just think of a boardroom coup. They think of a man who showed up late one day and left with the whole damn company. And every time someone asks about the man who got fired by his wife, I just chuckle and say, yeah, and then I bought the company.